Hey, William, how you doing today?
Hey, Todd, I'm doing good.
Good. So here we go. We're going to start with a little clip from Michael and Jesse. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Jesse Peterson. He's a minister and has a very popular talk show. And here's his information if anybody wants to go over there and check him out. Let me just play this clip and then we'll get going and start talking about what's going on here. So here it is.
Well, the breaking point was recently, a few months ago, my girlfriend of 6 years left me, and the man that she left me for was a toxic male. He was the type of male that I thought we were fighting against. But for some reason, she's gone with him and threw me to the side. And if they want to do that, that's fine, because I'm not going to participate in toxic masculinity and this type of game where you're just going to use me as bait or a designated driver to get you to your protests. And
amazing. So you dated her for 3 years?
6 years.
6 years.
6 years.
Were you guys living together?
Yes, we were.
And how old are you, Michael?
I'm 32 years old.
Oh, you seem younger. Why did you marry her?
That's a good question. I guess she just didn't want to. I'm not the type to propose. I would need to be proposed to, so she never asked.
Why would you need? Men are not supposed to be proposed to, because men bring the woman into their world. He doesn't go into her world. Why would you need to be proposed to? You're not a woman.
Because proposals are toxic masculinity. That is a man putting a woman on the spot and saying, I need an answer right now. And I'm not that type of guy. I let women have the power, and I give them the power and responsibility, and I am just here to support them.
Beta. Well, that...
Jesse.
That's why your girlfriend left you, because you're a beta male. She wanted you to be a man. She wanted you to lead the way, not follow her.
But I did everything for that. Anything she asked for, I would do.
But you should never do that.
Well, what am I supposed to do?
You're supposed to lead and do the right thing, and she will follow. You're not supposed to give a woman or do everything that a woman asks you to do, because that's a weakness, and women hate weakness, hate weak men.
I love this clip. This guy, apparently, Michael shows up on Jesse's show quite a bit. I've seen some other clips that are really, really extreme. So I actually am not convinced this is for real. You know, I kind of wonder in some ways that maybe Michael is like kind of creating some kind of role or something here. But whatever it is, I do think this kind of thing can show up in the real world. So why don't we treat it as if it is real? Because it probably is, and just go from there. So so what are your first thoughts, William?
We can get to the dramatic truth behind whatever is being performed here. It feels performative for sure. I mean, I guess right off the bat, I'm like, was there buy-in here? Did he come to Jesse for look, I'm struggling, I need your help? Is that
well, that's just it. And I'd have to do a little bit more research on Michael, because he does show up in other, I mean, there's one that I saw where he had a wig on, like a woman's wig. So I don't know if he's going into the trans thing or what. Okay. So yeah, I think, in fact, this clip comes from a very long interview with Michael that goes on. There's quite a bit before this and quite a bit after it. And so who knows the detail of it. And I just picked this little piece of it out so we can talk about this idea of toxic masculinity as it's performed from, again, an archetypal stance of the man asking the woman to marry him. And Jesse goes into this thing about that a man is supposed to lead, that the man doesn't go into her world, she goes into his world, which is kind of an interesting, controversial idea in our contemporary culture. You know, that men don't go into a woman's world, but he has to lead her into his. So it's like archetypally, we can say that's a definite, in the archetypal world of things. But obviously, not everybody follows that. And where are the extremes here? That he doesn't have to necessarily go into what Jesse is saying, but what are your thoughts about all that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think interestingly enough, I want to just sort of back up into the rhetorical perspective here. So, like, clearly there's buy-in. You know, he said, "Look, I'm struggling in this. I need you to help me," which changes
right.
things.
Right.
Because he's saying what Jesse's now saying is, from my perspective, these things are declaratively true, right?
Right.
As opposed to offering solutions. Because the first thing that strikes me on this is these shoulds and shouldn'ts and musts, and it's like, well.
Yeah.
This is where you lose your audience, especially for the progressives who are going to come back at you with, it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
Now, we can argue that archetypally, it's a non-negotiable. The thing about archetypal psychology or tuning into any archetypal frequencies is that when you do that honestly, you find that there is a kind of Saturnine brutality in it's not negotiable and it's not value driven. Archetypes don't give a shit. They don't have values. It's not right or wrong, good or bad.
Yeah, right.
This is the way that things are, right?
And you can deviate from them as long as you're conscious of that and conscious of the consequences of swimming upstream, say. You know, you can always swim upstream. You just got to be aware that's what you're doing and where you may run into trouble. And of course, Michael's run into trouble here because this girl's left him. Now, exactly why is it? Because he was not an archetypal male, or was it because he was a jerk in some other way? We don't know that. Right.
Archetypal male. Well, I mean, isn't the reality, of course, that no such thing really exists?
Exactly.
Because the archetypes need to be inflected through radical particulars.
Right.
And it's never all of one, right? I mean, the only situation in which you're going to find yourself really as archetypal male is when you're in a state that we call archetypal possession, and that's not a good thing. That's when you have no agency, when you've been taken over, and that's obviously from the perspective of depth psychology, a place that you don't want to be in. Right.
Now, for our listeners, for just a second, for our listeners that don't know what an archetype is, there's a lot of different ways that you can find that out, of course, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But essentially, archetypes they're almost like instincts. They're patterns that we believe have been established over a very, very long period of human beings existing on Earth. And, the mother archetype, the father archetype, they're patterns of behavior, patterns of being, of seeing things a particular way and behaving a particular way. They are forces, essentially, more than anything else. This is my opinion. William, you can add or disagree with what I'm saying. They're forces, essentially, and like you just said, we don't necessarily succumb to those forces entirely, because we'll generally, in the real world, we'll generally run into trouble if we become possessed by the archetypes. But they're still forces, and if we go against the forces, if we're not conscious of that, we can run into trouble. And that's really the whole point here, is to be conscious of the archetypal forces and to be able to manage them and deal with them. Do you agree with that? Is that kind of in line?
I agree. And really, another way of putting that is to be it's a Taoist mentality. It's to go with the flow. It's to go with the flow of what it is, and not try to go against some fundamental order of things that only gets you into trouble when you do. What I'll add about archetypes that I think is important is they are transcultural, transhistorical, trans species. I mean, they kind of transcend everything. It's not really that they speak so much to human experience as to what is behind human experience, because we can see archetypal energies in the plant world, in the mineral world, in other worlds where they exist. For example, mother isn't a human convention. It doesn't only exist for humans. Mother exists in cosmic space as well. And then he's presenting this idea here of toxic masculinity, something that we hear a lot of. And it's interesting. I mean, I think what I see a lot is that people take for granted what we mean when we say that in some way. But I think we need to break that down a little bit, because it seems overused quite a bit, right? And it also has this sort of knock-on effect that we conflate masculinity in its shadow forms, the toxic form.
Right.
So the key thing for me to remember is that toxic is in the dose. Paracelsus says the poison's in the dose, right? It's too much of something. And from a Jungian perspective on shadow, it's the same thing. It's something without any balance from its contra, that tips it into shadow.
Right.
Masculinity unbalanced with the feminine counterpart, if you have the yin without the yang, the dot of the yin within the yang, that's when you become unbalanced and tip into shadow, right? But it's interesting how he says something here at one point where he's literally conflating this concept of toxic masculinity, what I would call shadow masculinity or immature masculinity, with masculinity in what Robert Moore would call its fullness.
Yeah.
Toxic male because I don't remember exactly the words he used, but he's a toxic male because he's taking the lead. He's a toxic male because,
And the part of this too that I think we do have to factor in is the culture. There's an agenda in the culture that is, in my opinion, this is an opinion that other people may or may not agree with, but there is an intention in the culture to create a more toxic masculine figure in the culture. Right. And I don't think it's an organic occurrence. I don't think it's naturally happening. Yeah. And I think that he demonstrates that quite a bit because there's this almost irrational stance he takes that asking a girl to marry him or having any kind of lead in his wants and his desires is toxic. And I don't think he would come up with that on his own. I think that there's a indoctrination, there's a whatever you want to call it, that's going on in the culture that I think supports this idea. Yeah, exactly. And we see that all the time, like we see that with situations where boys say are having a scrap, that they're having a little boy fight on the playground when they're like 6 years old, and the teacher runs out and says, this is toxic masculinity, that you're aggressive like this. And these are all natural things for boys. Again, going into archetypes, it's a natural archetypal king gesture to ask his queen to marry him, and I can see where he's going with that. I can see that if he is, like you were saying, a high dose of that masculine control and suppression over the feminine is toxic. It's the shadow. It is toxic. Yeah. But I think, just like you just said, I think he's confusing that. He's conflating it with something else. But
subjugation or dominance versus leadership, and they're very close. And I think that's why people kind of get confused, because it requires nuance for you to piece apart the difference between the two and not to conflate them and get confused.
Right.
The force that you're talking about too, when I hear you say that, I'm like, well, I can name that for you. It's called misandry. It's an internalized disdain or contempt for the masculine. And I think it's as prevalent, if not more so these days, than misogyny, which dominated, in the last, 40, 50 years. That was a major thing. But now that it seems to me that the tides are now shifting to a kind of, it's almost as if no one ever stopped to wonder whether or not what they were doing was just flipping the scales the other way. Right. And misandry, it almost feels like it's excused. It's almost like sort of laughed away. Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm denigrating men, but they deserve it. Or, they've been, here's one. They've been denigrating us for so long. Now it's our turn to get shots off at them. So
now, do you think this is a natural process? I mean, do you think that there's no push from the culture behind this shift into this toxic masculinity idea, or do you think it's a natural psychological process that we're like the pendulum swinging harder the other way, or whatever it might be?
Well, not to get too esoteric, because I know we're trying to keep this accessible, but Kabir makes this comment about, have you ever noticed that when the pendulum is swinging in one direction, it's gaining momentum to swing the other way? Right. And so and this is kind of what we get lost in. And when you look at archetypal energies and their bipolar opposites, what we often find is that the trouble is that we swing between the bipolar polarities. We go from the coward to the tyrant. Yeah. What we want to find is to stop the pendulum from swinging, so that we can find a way to move and develop through that, and to find the center, which is masculinity in its fullness, or kingship in that case in its fullness.
Now, but you're still making the assumption that this isn't being propelled by the culture. Oh,
well,
okay.
I don't know that it's.
I mean, it may not be. It may not be, and also the propulsion from the culture may be part of the pendulum swing. I mean, I'm not like saying that one has to be without the other, for it to be legitimate. It could be both happening at the same time as being a natural process. The culture going through what it's going through is a natural process.
Exactly, natural process. But it feels like,
right.
In fairgrounds they have the ship that swings. It's like we're on the ship, and we're all just screaming our heads off,
right.
And so that's, we're kind of puppets on a string. But again, not to go too deep in esoteric, but if you look at the work of Maria Gambudis, or I can't remember how you pronounce her name, Demetria George, these great thinkers on the feminine, what they strongly assert is that humanity lived under a matriarchy. That matriarchy dissolved into its shadow. The patriarchy emerged to find balance. We got pulled into that. Now the patriarchy is falling, and we're starting to see the rise of the matriarchy. And again, value neutral. Each of those systems, each of those polarities have pluses and minuses. When they're in decline, the shadow starts to come forward, and that's what we see. Because patriarchy is in decline, now we see the kind of wrecking ball effect of the dying of its light, and which is, I think, why we conflate the two, because we're on this kind of like collision course to some cataclysmic shift, and we're all screaming our heads off, right? It's hard to keep your head in that kind of shift, right?
Right. So going to Michael again, he's bought into this.
Yeah.
Pretty much 100%. And he's suffering as a result of it, even though he doesn't really know, or both parties, he and his girlfriend, don't really know why. The idea, I do everything for her. What woman wouldn't want their partner to do everything? You drive them to their protests and to their whatever they're doing. But then Jesse says, no, women see that as a weakness. So what would be your comment on that? Like what is it that a man is supposed to do for his partner that is doing for her, where what Michael is doing, according to Jesse, is not what a woman wants? Where does that, I mean, I think, doing things for your partner as a man, taking her places, doing everything for her, that's certainly, now I have a real animal possession problem. I have my whole life. So I've got my own issues around that. I would probably be more like Michael than not like him in that regard. Not so much with the toxic masculinity part of it, but so where are your thoughts on that?
Okay. So I'm going to start off by saying we can pull out of man, woman here. Right. Okay. And one of the great experiences that I had around this work in polarities, the archetypal masculine and feminine balances in the psyche, is recognizing that the greatest polarized relationship that I ever witnessed was between two women. One carried the feminine with utter grace and total commitment, and the other carried the masculine. And watching the two of them dance, and carry that with each other, it was like a masterclass in how this is done. And especially, on top of the fact that lies in, this example, it doesn't matter what's between your legs. It doesn't matter how you identify.
Oh, it doesn't at all. This is a time to say this, and I say this to my clients all the time when I go off into these thinking, is that the archetypes are, they can be labeled as masculine and feminine, but the person that constellates them doesn't need to be either one. It's like they can be whatever gender, they can be whatever they identify with, whatever you want to call it. It's the archetypes that are actually calling the shots regarding masculine, feminine. Now, in this case, we're assuming that Michael is a biological male. Maybe he isn't. I don't know. I mean, I don't know him. And we're assuming his girlfriend is a biological female. So he is constellating whatever archetypes, and she is too. So that's really what we're talking about. Not so much that, I mean, it just so happened to be male and female, and we're assuming that. But anyway, go on with what you were saying.
Yeah, no, and this is an interesting thing with people like Pastor Jesse, where, he's onto something fundamentally true, and yet, he comes at it from a slightly different perspective, one of certainty. And I won't go off on a tangent about the trouble we get in when we believe that we're right about things. But yeah, so basically what this guy has said is, look, I'm suffering as a result of my relationships. I've come to you for a different perspective. He's got his backup. He doesn't necessarily want to hear, the medicine that Jesse's offering him. He doesn't want to take it in. But there is a kind of recognition in him that maybe the way that I've come about this is problematic. I mean, otherwise he wouldn't be on the show unless he's a plant or something, right?
Yeah.
And maybe there is a kind of Christian right-wing fantasy that one day liberals will wake up and come to their senses and come begging to them for advice.
Well, I think we have to factor that in here when we're talking about the rigidity of the biological male constellating the masculine archetypes. Yeah. And I would assume in Jesse's worldview, that's the way it would be. That a biological female has no real business constellating the masculine archetype. She's not going to be the king in a male-female relationship and him be the queen. That won't work for him. So I don't think that's what's happened, because I don't think this guy, Michael's partner, is constellating masculine archetypes. It doesn't seem like, because there's a conflict. If she was, there wouldn't be a conflict. She would have her queen and Michael. And it wouldn't matter to her if he did everything for her, if he wasn't the leader and she was the lead. That wouldn't cause a conflict. So Jesse's assuming that she is leaving him because he is the beta male, or he is the ineffectual male, the weak male. Yeah. That's why she's leaving him.
He fails to realize that because he's not able to constellate masculinity in a way that would create containment and leadership, that she has rejected him on those grounds, even though she may be not consciously aware of why she's done it.
Exactly.
She doesn't know.
She wouldn't be, especially in this culture, if she does believe in toxic masculinity, the way that he's describing it, that she would have no idea why she wasn't interested in him. No. Exactly.
Well, and this is the thing. I mean, I think this is why sweeping through a lot of these ideological possession states that people get into, when we sweep through that, we can find the healing. So if you're under the belief that a woman needs to be independent and carry the masculine in a relationship, and not rely on men, because to do so would be to not be a feminist, or to be promoting toxic masculinity or whatever. I mean, you can get stuck in that and suffer, not realizing that what you need is not more autonomy, not more masculinity in your life, but to be able to let that go and have it be held by someone in partnership.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And this is where the consciousness thing comes in too, because if you are not conscious of the archetypal powers that are running underneath everything, even though you're not aware of them or conscious of them or want them, they still are. So if you are unconsciously taking the role of the masculine as a female partner, and are not conscious of what's going on, then you will then go, what's wrong in this relationship? Why isn't my partner, my male partner, doing the things I want him to do to be a male partner? Because she's not conscious that she's taken over those archetypes and he's rejected them. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I think that what we don't want to lose in these kind of perspectives is, like Pastor Jesse, Jordan Peterson, you can fit in whomever.
Yeah, right.
Well, here's what they're offering. If things are not working out for you, if you're suffering in relationship, I may have an answer for you. And if you have ears to hear it, try this on, see if this fits. If you take in what I'm saying in earnest and apply that to your relationships, see if it works. Take a radically pragmatic stance, which is what all good therapists and counselors should be doing, right? We care about what works, not why it works or where it comes from, but that it works for you. That it alleviates suffering, that it creates the conditions for transformation in your life toward your higher, more authentic self. And that's really what's on offer here. Hey, try this on, see if it fits. You don't like it, fine.
He's obviously Jesse's not going to do that. Okay, that's not his thing. But you're absolutely right, and it's clear because that's not his thing, and he's not doing that Michael completely rejects him. Yeah. He doesn't even want to listen to what his suggestion is, because it's not presented in a way that isn't confrontational and isn't conflictual with his own belief system. And so he's obviously, I mean, I think he declares he is a therapist. I mean, I think that's one of the things he does.
Pastor
Jesse does. Yeah, right. He's certainly a therapist in the religious point of view, but you know, and it's his show. He's just, I mean, he's trying to make conflict. He wants that argument between he and Michael to tell him, well, you don't know what you're talking about. That's toxic, you know, whatever. Exactly. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if Michael were our client, that's how we might approach it. I mean, depends on the more information and a better understanding of what's really going on, which we don't get from 2 minutes. But, you know, is to say, so, you know, where are you with this? Where are you with this idea that you're toxic because you're taking the lead, or because you're actually putting yourself first in a situation with your partner? Like, where is that toxic and whatever? That's what we would do as therapists, certainly. Well,
and right. And I mean, it seems very clear to me that Pastor Jesse's intention here isn't healing.
No.
It's more about proving the point.
Yeah. And I think he'd admit to that.
We are right all along. Women should be women, men should be men, and you're suffering because you didn't listen to us. And now that you've come crawling to me for help, I have this sort of boost of ego inflation, feeling that I'm right. Ironically, you know, of course, as a Christian, right? Because isn't one of the things that's amazing about the figure of Christ is that Christ constellates this amazing balance between the masculine and the feminine.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
When you look at the story of Christ, it's kind of a mind-blowing example. Now, sure, there are other examples as well. I mean, Christ isn't the only one, but that's the thing that's so incredible about the figure of Christ, is that he manages to navigate these things with grace. Right. Let's also talk about something else here that kind of is a little bit crazy making, coming from a person who proposes to be a Christian. You know, this is like, he's in a culture war. And as I said earlier, you know, I don't disagree with the idea that values are under attack here, but these war metaphors are crazy. Here we have this guy on the other end talking about, he literally says something like, I thought that those kind of men, she went and she was in relationship with this guy who he thinks is toxic now. She left him for this guy, right? Right. And he goes, because I was under the impression that that was the kind of toxic masculinity that we were fighting against.
Okay. Yeah. Okay?
And I hear this and I'm like, right. It always reminds me of the T-shirt, the funny T-shirt that says "Smash the Patriarchy."
Oh, so right.
Immediately, I'm like, you got to be
talk about masculine. Yeah. Right.
So, but this is the thing, and when in patriarchal systems in decline, like we are now, everyone suffers and everyone gets pulled in, and the toxic or shadow masculinity is going to devolve into willful war making because nothing else is working. So we have to now go to war.
Right.
And it's crazy. Smash the patriarchy,
and it will become
toxic men. And there's a deep irony in that. It's like, why do you want to smash the patriarchy? Oh, because all they ever do is, you know, smash things. Yeah, right. I know. But we have to love this into creation, and isn't that the teaching of Christ?
Yeah.
The will through love.
No, but that's the whole thing. In my opinion, one of the biggest problems that we have in the culture is that we don't recognize the archetypal powers, and we don't see them as what they really are, and we're not conscious, and therefore we get into these kinds of situations where we do something that's entirely irrational as well as irrelevant. You know, smash the patriarchy. It's like, so you're doing the exact thing that you're criticizing the patriarchy for doing, is smashing and is taking, you know, the warrior archetype, which is a masculine archetype, and using that to fight itself with.
And one last point was just that on the other side too, you know, you have like now Christians acting in a very unchristian way, talking about going to war with people, you know, to defend Christian values. And you can see on both sides here that these war metaphors are what's taken over, and the Christians have lost the message of Christ, which is to love your enemy, right? And the radical progressives have lost the realization that what we're trying to do here is not seek revenge on the patriarchy, which is a very patriarchal thing, but to bring back some balance. You know,
well, there
is equity of outcome. Well, you're not going to get any kind of equity of outcome if you're going for tit for tat, swinging on these pendulums of
right. Well, it's I mean, do we want to go on with this for
No,
like
right? We could go on for another
6
half hour.
hours, because you're bringing up something that is so radically important right now from a cultural point of view, and always has been. This idea of solving humanitarian issues with war and with violence has been in our thing, from the very beginning. There was more reason for it at the beginning, only because people were not trying to resolve humanitarian issues. They were resolving territorial, I want what you have and I'm going to go kill you and get it. There was a little bit more rational sense in war in that regard. Today, there's absolutely no reason to have any kind of violence in the way that you're talking about. Unless in defense. I mean, you can argue that point. If somebody's coming after you with a sword and is going to like pierce your brain with it, then, again, of course, that's a masculine archetypal process of when to swing the sword and when to put it away or just let it glint.
A huge part of reclaiming masculinity in its divine fullness is not shying away from being able to be not just assertive, but to be able to wield aggression against someone who's coming for what's sacred to you.
That's exactly right. I would not. In fact, I'll recant a little bit of what I said when I said there's absolutely no reason. In the world as it is now, the conflicts that we see in the world is toxic aggression. It's toxic. It's political. It has almost nothing to do with what you just described.
Right.
And I think back in the old days, it was more to do with what you described. The marauders would come into a village and they would rape and kill everybody, and then the men would stand up and fight them. Okay. But that's not what's going on now. If you go into the political reasons why there are conflicts in the world, that people are killing one another, there is no reason that cannot be settled in other ways. I don't know. You may not agree with that.
Well, at the risk of opening up a very, very big can of worms.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly what you described is how many people see what happened on October 7th.
Oh, I know. Well, that's the story. That's the narrative. Same thing in Europe. It's the same thing. Big bully Putin comes in and attacks little Ukraine that's weak and whatever. But that's not really what's happening. Sure. And I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of people that may not agree with that. We can cut all this out if you want to. Yeah, I know. It's a big one. Yeah. It's just what we said we weren't going to do. No, but that's good. That's good.